I know what it feels like to be in the middle of the storm praying for peace while all hell breaks loose around you. I know what it's like to ask God why and be met with silence. I know what it's like to stare at the promises of God and feel like they skipped over your house. But I came to remind somebody today, God's plan for you is still intact. You may feel like you've taken detours, like life knocked the wind out of your faith, like disappointment rearranged your expectations. But even in the middle of all that confusion, God never changed his mind about you. The enemy wants you to believe the plan is over, but God says it's just being rewritten with deeper purpose. Sometimes we think restoration means God will take us back to how things were before the hurt. But God isn't trying to rewind your life. He's trying to rebuild it, stronger, wiser, bolder, and yes, more faith-filled than ever before. See, faith doesn't mean you always feel strong. Faith means you trust even when you're weak. It means you keep walking when you don't see the way. It means you raise your hands in worship even when your heart is heavy. Let God restore your faith, not in your own timing, not in your own control, but in his divine strategy. Yes, you've cried. Yes, you've questioned. Yes, you've doubted. And guess what? God can handle all of that. He's not afraid of your honesty. He just wants your heart. You might have thought the delay meant denial, but what if I told you the delay was divine protection? What if God kept you hidden because what he's building in you needed time to root? What if the waiting season wasn't a punishment, but a preparation for the promise? You are still chosen, still called, still worthy. The anointing didn't lift just because the path got rough. And even if you feel like you're limping your way through life, guess what? God can still use you limp and all. He's not asking you to be perfect. He's asking you to be present, to show up even when you're scared, to believe again even after the disappointment, to surrender the pieces and trust him to make something beautiful. Let God restore your faith, family. Not just your Sunday faith, but the kind of faith that wakes up Monday morning and says, even here, God has a plan. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the next step. You don't have to understand the whole picture. Just trust the artist, because he who began a good work in you is not finished yet. He's still writing, still healing, still calling you forward. And your job is to believe again, not because you feel ready, but because he is always faithful. Let God restore your faith in his plan, because his plan still includes you. Sometimes what shakes us isn't that God stopped moving. It's that we stop recognizing how he's moving. It's not that the plan shifted. It's that life hit us so hard, we can't see it clearly anymore. You ever look at something and realize you're not sure what you're even looking at anymore? Like what once looked like purpose now feels like punishment. What once felt like a promise now feels like pressure. That's what happens when you're in the thick of it, when you're knee deep in disappointment. When the things you prayed for start to look like burdens. When the timeline you thought you were on gets wrecked by detours, heartbreak, and unanswered prayers. It starts to feel like maybe, just maybe, God took his hand off your life. But let me remind you, the plan didn't change, your perspective did, because here's the truth. God's plan is never fragile. It's not dependent on everything going perfectly in your life. It's not deterred by the delays, the dysfunction, or even your doubts. It's solid, eternal, and rooted in love. The problem is when you go through enough storms, you stop expecting the sun. When you experience enough betrayal, you start to expect abandonment, even from God. Your view becomes shaped by what hurt you instead of who called you. It's easy to trust the plan when it's producing, but what about when it's pruning? What about when it's silent? What about when it costs you more than you expected? See, God's plan doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like standing still. Sometimes it looks like starting over. Sometimes it looks like being in rooms where nobody sees your value, or being alone so you can learn your own. But just because you can't see the whole thing doesn't mean it's stopped unfolding. You ever put a puzzle together and get frustrated halfway through? That's what it feels like when your current season doesn't look like the finished picture God promised you. But every piece still matters. And just because one doesn't fit the way you expected doesn't mean it's not part of the bigger picture. The enemy's goal is to distort your vision, because if he can get you to stop believing in the plan, he can get you to walk away from it. He wants you to believe the detour is the end. He wants you to think the delay means denial. But God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. So maybe what feels like destruction is actually divine redirection. It's not the plan that changed. It's how you've been forced to look at it, through tears, through trauma, through disappointment. And it's okay to admit that. It's okay to say, God, I don't see what you're doing, because even in your confusion, the plan is still active. It's still alive. It's still unfolding, just not in the way you imagined. Let me know when you're ready for keynote 2, or if you'd like this in spoken format too. We live in a world that tries to shame brokenness, that tries to hide it, cover it up, filter it, and act like it never happened. But God doesn't avoid broken things. He specializes in them. He does his best work in the places we try to hide, the places that feel too messy, too painful, too cracked open to ever be whole again. But what if the very area you've been trying to bury is the exact place God wants to build? Brokenness is not your expiration date, it's your starting line. It's the place where pretense dies and truth rises, where you stop performing and start healing, where your faith stops being cute and starts becoming real. Because it's in brokenness that you learn to rely on a God who doesn't need your strength, just your surrender. See, we've been taught to treat brokenness like it's something shameful. Like if people saw the cracks, they'd stop believing in our anointing. But what if the cracks aren't a curse? What if they're proof you've been through something and lived to tell it? What if they're the very places where God's light shines through? When you're broken, something powerful happens. You stop pretending you're in control. You stop trying to make everything make sense. You stop worshiping the plan and start seeking the planner. You get real, raw, vulnerable, and that's the kind of heart God can move through. Not the polished, performance-driven version of you, but the one who's bleeding, crying, unsure, but still saying, God, I need you. Because here's what the enemy doesn't want you to know. Brokenness is not a threat to God. It's a gateway to deeper revelation, to new identity, to transformation that couldn't happen in comfort. Restoration doesn't begin when things get easy. It begins when everything falls apart and you realize that the only thing holding you together is grace. Some of the greatest moves of God are birthed in the darkest moments, when your heart is in pieces, when your mind is exhausted, when you've got nothing left to offer except your yes. That's when God steps in, not to shame you for breaking, but to gather every shattered piece and begin creating something only He could imagine. It may feel like you're too far gone, like there are too many mistakes, too many regrets, too much history. But the same God who created the universe out of nothing can create beauty out of your broken. He doesn't discard what's damaged. He redefines it. He doesn't erase the scars. He turns them into stories. When you hand God your brokenness, you're not giving Him something useless. You're giving Him access. You're saying, this is what's left. If you want it, you can have it. And He takes what's left and breathes new life into it. He doesn't need perfect conditions to restore you. He needs honesty. He needs surrender. He needs your brokenness to become your offering, not your excuse. There's something in us that craves certainty. We want the blueprint before we take the first step. We want the outcome before we say yes. We want the plan to make sense before we commit our hearts to it. But God doesn't operate on our terms of comfort. Faith was never designed to be a contract you read through before you sign. It's a calling you respond to even when the details are hidden. Understanding makes us feel safe, but faith is what makes us grow. Faith stretches us into unfamiliar territory. It's walking into rooms you don't feel ready for. It's building when you don't have the full picture. It's believing God is doing something good, even when nothing around you looks good. It's letting go of the need to control and embracing the invitation to trust. The problem is we've been taught to equate faith with results. If it works, then I'll believe. If it shows up, then I'll worship. If it turns around, then I'll testify. But faith says, even if I don't see it yet, I'm still going to move. I'm still going to trust. I'm still going to believe that God is who he says he is. Faith isn't flashy. It's not always loud. It's not always understood. Sometimes it looks like showing up when your heart is heavy. Sometimes it looks like clapping for others when you feel forgotten. Sometimes it looks like putting one foot in front of the other when you have no idea where the road is leading. And don't think for a second that your faith has to be flawless to be real. Faith isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move in spite of it. You can be trembling and still trusting. You can be confused and still committed, because faith isn't rooted in feelings, it's rooted in truth. The truth of who God is, the truth of what he's spoken, the truth of his faithfulness, even when life feels unpredictable. There will be seasons where nothing makes sense, where prayers feel unanswered, where the silence is deafening. But those are the moments where faith grows deep, not because you see, but because you choose to believe. You choose to hold on when everything says let go. You choose to worship when it would be easier to withdraw. You choose to stay planted when your emotions are screaming to run. Faith was never about understanding every move of God. It was about following him even when his steps don't look like yours, even when the path doesn't seem logical, even when the outcome is uncertain. That's where trust is forged, not in clarity, but in the chaos, not in certainty, but in surrender. And maybe that's why God doesn't always give us the full picture, because if we could understand it all, we'd stop needing him. But when you don't have all the answers and you still choose to trust, that's when your faith becomes real, raw, and unshakable. We don't like waiting. We want quick answers, instant breakthroughs, and promises that show up overnight. But God is not a microwave God. He's a master builder. And when God builds something in your life, he doesn't rush it. He lays foundation, he digs deep. He prepares you for the weight of what you've been asking for. Because if you step into the promise before you're ready, the very thing that was meant to bless you could break you. Delay will test your character. It'll stretch your patience. It'll expose your motives, because when everything slows down and the timeline you expected doesn't match the reality you're living, you have to confront what you really believe. Do you trust God only when things go your way? Or do you trust him because you know he sees what you can't? We often mistake silence for absence. We think if nothing's happening on the outside, then nothing's happening at all. But God does his deepest work in the hidden places. Just like a seed has to be buried before it can grow, your delay might just be your burial season. Not the end, but the beginning of something you can't even imagine yet. The delay isn't a sign that God forgot about you. It's a sign that he's preparing you for what he hasn't forgotten. There are doors he's going to open, but first, he's making sure you're ready to walk through them. There are opportunities coming, but he's refining your discernment so you don't settle for a counterfeit version of what he promised. There's healing happening, even if it's not obvious yet. There's growth taking place in places you can't measure, because delay is not passive, it's active in the spirit. God is working while you're waiting. He's orchestrating, aligning, pruning, stretching, and molding you. He's getting the environment right. He's shifting the atmosphere. He's building your endurance so you can stand firm when the pressure of the promise comes. And let's be honest, sometimes the delay isn't just about what God is doing around you, but what he's doing in you. The delay is where he teaches you to worship without the outcome, to pray without the proof, to believe without the visible evidence. It's in the waiting that your faith matures. It's in the waiting that you learn to carry peace in uncertain places. If God rushed the process, you might arrive empty. You might show up to the promise still holding on to the trauma, still carrying the fear, still believing you're not enough. But he loves you too much to let you step into destiny unprepared. So he delays not to hurt you, but to develop you, to make sure when the door swings open, you don't just enter it, you own it. You see, delay can feel like punishment when you don't understand the purpose. But when you trust that God's timing is not random, you begin to see the delay as a setup, not for less, but for greater. There's this unspoken pressure in the church and culture, and sometimes even in our own minds, that tells us we have to have unwavering faith at all times. That if we doubt, we're somehow disappointing God. That if we question, we're not spiritual enough. But the truth is, God is not afraid of your doubt. He's not shaken by your questions. He's not running from your honesty. He's leaning into it. Doubt doesn't disqualify you. It humanizes you. You are not a robot on a spiritual autopilot. You are a person with wounds, memories, disappointments, and fears. And faith doesn't cancel all that out. It meets it head on. It stands next to your questions and says, even in this, I believe. But you can't get to that place if you keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. If you keep rehearsing strength instead of revealing your struggle. God doesn't bless masks. He blesses truth. And sometimes truth sounds like, God, I'm trying, but I don't understand you right now. Or I want to trust you, but I'm scared. Or even I believed you and I got hurt anyway. That's not rebellion, that's relationship. That's real. And that's the kind of heart God can work with. Not the curated version of you, but the raw, unfiltered, trembling one that's still reaching out even through tears. In Scripture, we see people who wrestled with doubt and still carried destiny. Thomas doubted, and Jesus met him with compassion, not condemnation. Elijah had a whole breakdown under a tree, begging God to take his life, and God didn't rebuke him. He nourished him. Job asked every hard question, cried every bitter tear, and still God counted him righteous because God never required perfection. He requires presence. Your doubt doesn't scare God because he already knows you. He's not surprised by your thoughts. He's not caught off guard by your silence. You may have stopped talking to him out of disappointment, but he never stopped talking to you. And when you come to him honestly, even in your lowest, ugliest, messiest place, you create a space for intimacy that polished prayers could never build. This is where religion ends and relationship begins. When you stop trying to perform faith and start confessing where it hurts. When you give God access to the parts of your heart you usually keep hidden. When you say, God, this is me. With all my doubts, all my fears, all my confusion, do you still want me? And without hesitation, he says yes. Every time. He doesn't just want your praise when it's easy. He wants your pain when it's heavy. He wants your confusion, your in-between moments, your I believe, but help my unbelief whispers. Because that's where trust is born, not in the absence of doubt, but in the surrender of it. Not in pretending you're okay, but in admitting that you're not and choosing to believe anyway. We often think of restoration as going back to what was. Back to the version of ourselves before the pain, before the failure, before the heartbreak. We imagine healing as a rewind button, taking us back to the time when we felt stronger, more confident, more put together. But the truth is, God is not in the business of rewinding your life. He's in the business of revealing your identity through what you survived. What broke you did not destroy you. It uncovered you. It pulled back the layers of performance. It stripped away who you thought you had to be. It shattered the mask you wore to protect yourself. And now, in the aftermath, in the ashes, in the place where it all feels unfamiliar, that's where God steps in and begins to show you who you were always meant to be. You're not going back to the old version of you. That version couldn't carry the weight of what you're being called into. That version relied on approval, validation, and titles. That version didn't know how to set boundaries, didn't know how to say no, didn't know her worth apart from her productivity. That version was surviving but not thriving, loving others but neglecting herself. Showing up for everyone, but losing herself in the process. Restoration doesn't resurrect who you used to be. It resurrects purpose inside of who you are now. The version of you that's wiser because of what you lost, stronger because of what you let go of, more grounded because you've seen what it's like to have nothing but still have peace. That version of you knows how to fight for joy. That version of you doesn't chase people, she attracts alignment. That version of you may still have scars, but now those scars carry wisdom. And here's the beautiful thing about God. He doesn't restore you to make you presentable. He restores you to make you powerful. He takes what the enemy tried to use as proof that you were finished and turns it into the very platform for your calling. He takes your story, the one you were once ashamed of, and uses it to set others free. That's restoration, not just healing your wounds, but empowering you through them. There is a version of you that's been buried underneath all the survival, all the pretending, all the proving, and God is gently peeling it back, not to shame you, but to reintroduce you to yourself. To the one who knows her value isn't based on what she performs. To the one who doesn't need a stage to be significant. To the one who can walk into any room and still carry peace whether she's applauded or overlooked. You're not being restored to your past, you're being aligned with your future. A version of you that sees clearly, that loves deeply, that no longer breaks her back trying to be enough. The restoration God is doing in you isn't about fixing you, it's about revealing the you he always saw, even when you couldn't see her yet. Let me know when you're ready for another keynote or how you'd like to use these. So maybe life didn't go the way you expected. Maybe the detours broke your heart. Maybe the delays wore you out. Maybe the silence made you question if God still hears you. But can I tell you something? He was never absent. He was just building. And every tear you cried, every night you questioned, every battle you faced, it was never wasted. It was shaping you, stretching you, setting you up. This is not the end of your story. This is the moment God starts to restore what you thought was lost. Not by taking you backward, but by awakening the version of you that pain couldn't kill, that disappointment couldn't bury, that fear tried to silence. But she's still here. You're still here. And if you're still breathing, that means purpose is still alive inside of you. Let God restore your faith, not just in what he can do, but in who he is. A God who doesn't need your perfection, just your permission. A God who can take broken pieces and build beauty. A God who doesn't erase your story, he redeems it. He rewrites it with power and purpose. So yes, it might feel like you've been in the wilderness. But the wilderness is where God trains warriors. It's where he teaches you to hear his voice above the noise. It's where he teaches you how to walk by faith and not by sight. And when you come out, because you will come out, you won't just be restored. You'll be transformed, because when God restores, he doesn't return you to what was. He launches you into what's next. And what's next for you? Glory, growth, grace, power, and a testimony that says, I didn't see the plan, but I trusted the one who made it, and that was enough. Let God restore your faith, not in a perfect path, but in a perfect God.